Welcome to Saucy Math. This is another in a series of videos about factoring, and this one is going to talk about factoring by grouping. Now, the grouping method is a method you'll use for factoring usually when you have four terms in your expression and you somehow need to factor that expression. That's usually your clue when you see the four terms, like in this example here we have 3x to the third minus x squared minus 6x plus 2. Right, there's four terms there. When you see that, that's your clue that you're going to use this grouping method. And basically how the grouping method works is you'll group these four terms into a set of two terms and then a set of another two terms and look for the greatest common factor of each of those, and then kind of pretty cool stuff happens after that. You can put them together and factor it. All right, so let's start by doing that. So my first two terms, if I just kind of lightly block these off, I've got the 3x to the third minus x squared. That's going to be my first group. My second group is going to be this minus 6x plus 2. So if I go to that first group, the 3x to the third minus x squared, I want to look for the greatest common factor of those two terms. Right? And if you don't know what I mean by greatest common factor, I made a video about factoring by looking for the common factor, so you can go check out that video and kind of get some background about what that means. But for the 3x to the third and the minus x squared, what they have in common, their common factor is an x squared. All right, so I'm going to factor out an x squared from just those first two terms, and when I do that, again, if you think about this as dividing both of those terms by x squared, 3x to the third, when I divide away x squared, I'm going to be left with 3x, and the x squared, when I divide away x squared, I'm going to be left with a minus 1. All right, so for those first two terms, 3x to the third minus x squared, I can write that as x squared times 3x minus 1. All right, now I'm going to do a similar thing for that second group. I have negative 6x plus 2. All right, and what I want to happen when I do this second factoring for the second group here is whatever's left in the parentheses, I want to be exactly the same as what's in this parentheses here. So what I want to have left over after I factor this one is another 3x minus 1. So if you look at the negative 6x plus 2, right, there's only one x here, so we can't factor out an x, but the 6 and the 2 have a common factor of 2. All right, so over here I can pull out a common factor of 2, but now think about what's going to happen when I do that. If I pull out a factor of 2, I'm going to be left with a negative 3x and a plus 1. But what I want is a positive 3x and a minus 1. Right? Remember, whatever's in this parentheses is going to have to match whatever's in that second parentheses. So in order to make them match, I'm not going to pull out a 2 here. I'm going to pull out a negative 2. All right, so if I think about dividing these two terms here both by a negative 2, negative 6x divided by negative 2 is going to be positive 3x. And then positive 2 divided by negative 2 is going to be a negative 1, and my parentheses now exactly match the way that I want them to in order to be able to do the next step. All right, so that is the key thing when you're factoring by grouping. You split up your four terms into two separate groups, pull out the common factor of each group, and then whatever's in that parentheses has to match whatever's in that parentheses. And if they don't match, if they have, like, if this was a negative 3x plus 1, which didn't exactly match this one, if they match except the signs are different, that just means you need to pull out a negative from one of those, and then they'll match up. All right, which is what we saw here. Now, it may seem pretty amazing that when you do this, you end up with the same stuff inside these parentheses, but it kind of has to be that way. In order to do the next step of this factoring by grouping method, we have to have the same stuff in the parentheses there. So any problem that you do in this is going to look like this at some point. Right, the people who write the math textbooks, your teachers, when they put problems for quizzes and tests, they have to make it in such a way that you're going to have the same stuff in the parentheses. Otherwise, you'll be sitting there with your thumb up your butt, like not able to go any further. Which, that's a totally disgusting expression of putting your thumb up your butt. I don't know why people say that or where that came from. That's just totally gross. Anyway, I'm getting off topic here. And then I started thinking about putting my thumb up my butt and then how long I would have to wash my hands afterwards. But let's try to get back to this problem here. So once we get to this point here where we have the 3x minus 1 in both of our parentheses, now really we have two terms in this expression. Right, we have x squared times 3x minus 1, and then we have minus 2 times 3x minus 1. So now we have two terms in our expression, and these two terms also have a common factor. And their common factor is this parentheses 3x minus 1. All right, so now I can pull out a 3x minus 1 from each of these, and then what's left over, if I pull out a 3x minus 1 from this first term, I'm left with the x squared. And when I pull out the 3x minus 1 from this second term, I'm left with the minus 2. and now I have factored my expression. We get 3x minus 1 times x squared minus 2. Right, so that's why your parentheses has to match, because the 3x minus 1 and 3x minus 1, that has to be your common factor here. That becomes one of your factors, and then whatever stuff you pulled out, the x squared and the minus 2, those go together to make up your second factor. All right, and then we have factored that expression by the grouping method. All right, if we look at one more of these, all right, we've got 18x to the third plus 9x squared plus 2x plus 1. All right, so again, we see 4 terms there, so that's a pretty good clue that we're going to have to factor this one by grouping. All right, so I grouped together my first 2 terms and then my last 2 terms, and I look for the common factor of each one of those groups. So for the first group, the 18x to the third plus 9x squared, well, the 18 and the 9 can both be divided by 9. The x to the third and the x squared, they have that x squared in common, right? Remember, when there's variables involved, you take the variable with the lowest exponent as your common factor. All right, so if we divide both of these by 9x squared, we're left with, well, 18 divided by 9 is 2, x to the third divided by x squared, remember, subtract the exponents, 3 minus 2 gives us x to the first power, so we get 2x, and then 9x squared over 9x squared, that just equals 1. Right, so we get 2x plus 1. Now, when all this stuff cancels out here, the 9x squared over 9x squared, it doesn't just go away and become like a 0. There's still something there, right? Because we're dividing 9x squared divided by 9x squared. When you divide something by itself, it equals 1. So you do have to make sure you put that plus 1 there. A common mistake people make is to just say, well, this is 2x, and then this cancels out, so it's only 2x. All right? It's not only 2x, there's also that plus 1. So just don't forget that plus 1 there. And then if we look at our second group, we have 2x plus 1, and if you notice, that already matches up what's in this parentheses, right? And the 2x and the plus 1, they actually don't have any common factors other than 1. So I'm going to just go ahead and put a plus 1 outside the parentheses, and then write the 2x plus 1 at the end there. All right, so if there's no common factor when you're doing this grouping method with the 2x and the plus 1, you still have to pull something out of it. Everything's going to have a common factor of 1. So you can always pull out that 1 and put that in front of the parentheses and just leave the 2x plus 1 inside there. And just like the last one, the stuff in those parentheses match up, which they have to in order for us to do the next step. And like I said, all of these problems should work out that way. The only way it's not going to work out that way is if your teacher really wants to be a little devilish about it and give you one of these things on a test or something that doesn't actually factor. In that case, if this is 2x plus 1 and this is like 2x plus 3, they're not going to match, and then you just kind of have to stop there. You can't factor it. All right, so that's the only time you would see something like that, is if your teacher just wants to be difficult on you. All right, so once again, our common factor is 2x plus 1, and then what's left over when we factor that out is the 9x squared, and then this plus 1 that we pulled out here. All right, so that's our factoring of our original expression. So just like with any other type of factoring, once you get your answer, if you multiply all this stuff back together, it should give you the exact same expression that you started with. The terms might be a little bit out of place, like out of order, but you should get the exact same terms as what you get when you multiply this out. All right, so that's factoring by the grouping method. Make sure you check out my other videos on factoring. There are several other factoring methods that I'll be explaining to you. So check those out if you want to learn a lot more about factoring.